Welcome back to the Redemption Files. Today's story, I tried to capture not only love, betrayal, and redemption, but also make my hometown of London a character in its own right. I hope you enjoy The Fragile Heart of London, a novel of love, betrayal, and second chances, by Abby Turner. Chapter 1. The Girl in the Cafe. Rain battered the rose and thorn like an overzealous percussionist in a bad indie band who'd just discovered caffeine. The windows fogged with the breath of soggy patrons seeking warmth, their scarves damp and their spirits damper. Inside, Sienna Blake, London's reigning queen of art that makes people uncomfortable in a chic way, sat at her usual corner table under a painting of a screaming fox and sipped Earl Grey with the solemnity of a woman who had just discovered her ex was alive, texting and using ellipses like emotional hand grenades. 6 months, 6 bloody months of radio silence. She had gone from head over heels to head in a bin in record time, from romantic getaways in Santorini to solo dinners with Pinot Noir and passive-aggressive Postmates instructions, and now, like a bad sequel, to Notting Hill, where everyone's a bit more jaded and wears better coats. Daniel Whitmore stood before her, rain-soaked and unfairly attractive. He looked like a man who had run through a metaphor, a trench coat clinging to his frame, hair dripping like he was auditioning for the role of heartbroken architect with secrets. He hovered by the entrance, like he wasn't sure if he should come in or vanish like a poorly written character from one of those shows that gets cancelled after one season. Sienna didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at him with the cool detachment of a woman who had cried into enough throw pillows to launch a soft furnishings brand. "You look like hell," she said, taking another sip. Daniel smirked, wiping raindrops from his brow. "Yeah, I've missed you too." She blinked once, slowly. Is this some kind of twisted closure thing? You appear, I hurl a crumpet at your face, we call it a day." He walked toward her, carefully, like she might bolt or throw the teapot. "I didn't know where else to go. There's this charming new invention called texting," she said, voice like a scalpel. "You may have heard of it." "I deserved that." "You deserve a lot of things. A mild electric shock, for one." He stood there dripping on the hardwood floor while the patrons at neighbouring tables shamelessly eavesdropped behind their newspapers and carrot cakes. In London, a public confrontation was the equivalent of a Michelin star-rated meal. Sienna leaned back, arms crossed, and gestured toward the seat across from her. "Fine. You've got 5 minutes. Impress me." Daniel sat. It was a bold move for a man who once ghosted her during their anniversary trip planning. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," he began. "Oh, good," she said dryly. "Because nothing says healthy love like disappearing in the middle of a relationship, like a magician with commitment issues." He ran a hand through his wet hair, sighing. "It's complicated." "Of course it is." "Because saying I'm a coward who ran doesn't have the same ring to it." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the cafe vanished. The chatter, the clinking cups, the smell of wet wool and baked goods. Just them, 2 people with a shared history and a shared grief, wrapped in sarcasm like emotional bubble wrap. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "You made several." Daniel's hands curled around the mug the server had quietly dropped off during their verbal fencing. "Can we talk? Properly? Not in front of strangers and Victoria Sponge." Sienna considered him, considered the way his collar still sat unevenly, the faint scar on his jawline from when he'd crashed his bike trying to deliver her flowers, the way he looked at her, not with guilt, not with pride, but with something like hope. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know if I want to hear your excuses, or kick you in the shins." "That's fair, but," she continued, voice softening just a fraction, "I do want answers. And I want the truth this time." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Then I'll tell you everything. No lies, no filters." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough for the tea to go cold, and the patrons to start whispering with less subtlety. "One lie," she said finally, with a tight smile. "And I walk. And I take the scones." He smiled, the ghost of the man she'd loved flickering behind it. Deal. Chapter 2. The Lies We Tell. Daniel's flat smelled like damp books and regret. Sienna hadn't meant to come in, but he'd stood in the hallway looking like a kicked puppy until her resolve wore thin. She perched on the edge of his corduroy sofa, the kind that looked comfortable but felt like a passive-aggressive chair from a dentist's waiting room. He handed her a mug of tea and didn't sit. "Her name's Sophia," he began. "Sophia Kensington." Sienna blinked. "You left me for someone with a name like a luxury handbag. It's not like that." "Then what was it like, Daniel?" "Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks suspiciously like abandonment." He took a shaky breath and sat across from her, elbows on knees, like he was being interviewed for a documentary called Men Who Emotionally Implode. "She was sick," he said. "Cancer. Stage 3 when I found out. She didn't tell anyone until it was bad. And she's alone. No parents, no partner, just me." Sienna stared at him, the words turning over like wet laundry in her mind. "And that required ghosting me completely. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't want to drag you into something dark. You were planning your Paris residency, your show was taking off, and you decided I'd be what, too fragile?" she snapped. "Too distracted by your noble misery to focus on my art." "No," he said quickly. "I thought I was doing the right thing, giving her time, and giving you space." "For who, Daniel?" Silence. He looked like he wanted to answer but had misplaced the vocabulary. Even the rain outside seemed to pause, unsure whether to keep drizzling or let them wallow in this perfectly cinematic tension. The radiator groaned like an old man with opinions, and somewhere outside, a fox barked with impressive timing. Sienna set her mug down carefully. "You don't get to decide what's too dark for me. I've danced barefoot on broken glass and called it performance art." "I know. I've seen the scars." That shut her up for a moment. He was the only one who knew where they were, the small ones, metaphorical and literal, that she'd carried from her messy 20s into something resembling adulthood. She stood up. "You should have told me." "I know. I don't know if I forgive you." "I don't expect you to." "Good," she said, walking toward the door. "Because I'm not sure I remember how." Chapter 3. The Dark Secret. It started with an innocent search for takeaway. Sienna had been hunting for the menu to that questionable kebab shop when she stumbled on something else, something tucked inside Daniel's bookshelf between Architectural Digest and a worn copy of A Brief History of Brutalism. A newspaper clipping, folded and yellowing. She almost didn't read it. Almost. Promising young architect linked to fatal building collapse. There he was, in black and white, younger and thinner, his jaw clenched in a courtroom photo. The headline felt like a punch. The article below it, a gutting. 3 dead, dozens injured, foundation flaws, poor structural integrity. The firm blamed unforeseen weaknesses. The reporter's tone was barely restrained contempt. A line near the end mentioned Daniel had since relocated abroad. She dropped the clipping on the coffee table and waited. When Daniel walked in, carrying 2 steaming cartons and a stupid grin, he paused the moment he saw her face. "You found it." "You didn't think I would." "I hoped." 3 people died." "I know." His voice cracked like cheap plaster. He sat beside her slowly, the food forgotten. "I told them," he whispered. "I flagged the flaws, in writing, in meetings, but the firm was cutting corners, rushing deadlines, ignoring warnings. They buried the reports. I had no authority. I was just the guy who drew lines and worried too much. And when it happened, I ran, left the country, stayed off the radar, took freelance jobs, worked under aliases. It felt easier than trying to explain. And Sophia, she was the only one who stood by me. She didn't believe the headlines. Didn't flinch when I broke down." Sienna swallowed hard. "You let me think you were just emotionally stunted. Turns out, you were haunted." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'm sorry." For once, she didn't have a comeback. Only a heaviness settling between them, like dust on old blueprints. Chapter 4. The Temptation. London, in early spring, smelled like possibility and mild disappointment. The daffodils bloomed defiantly despite the cold. Sienna and Daniel moved through the city like strangers with a shared secret. They argued in Hyde Park, their voices muffled by polite joggers and startled ducks. "You should have fought," she hissed. "I did. Not hard enough." They whispered by the Thames, speaking in half-truths, letting the river steal their confessions. He held her hand once, by accident. She didn't pull away. And then, outside the Tate Modern, under clouds threatening to monologue, it happened. The kiss. Of course it happened in the rain. Of course it was dramatic and aching and entirely inappropriate. Of course her heart betrayed her brain and leaned into it like a fool. When she pulled back, breathless and wet, she stared at him with the wide eyes of someone dangling on the edge of something dangerous. "I can't trust you," she said. "I know." His breath was warm against her cheek. "But I want to run it back." She almost believed him. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. Sophia Kensington was pale, elegant, and annoyingly serene. Meeting her was like walking into a surprise job interview, equal parts intimidation and mild existential crisis. They met at a cafe in Chelsea, the kind with minimalist menus and emotionally supportive lighting. "She never told me she invited you," Daniel muttered, adjusting his colour. "I invited her," Sophia said. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind of voice that made you sit up straighter. Sienna sipped her espresso. "Well, this isn't awkward at all. I wanted to meet you," Sophia said, folding her hands over her lap. "I thought you deserved the truth. From me." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "Are you dying again?" Sophia laughed, dry and brittle. "Remission. For now." But the drama was fun while it lasted. They sat in silence for a beat. "I told him to go back to you," Sophia continued. "He never stopped loving you. Even when he was with me. Especially then." Sienna exhaled. "Why tell me?" "Because I'm not the one he needs." That night, Daniel stood outside her flat in the rain. Again, honestly, it was becoming a motif. "Tell me what you want," he begged, hair plastered to his forehead, hands in his pockets, like he didn't know what else to do with them. She looked at him, this beautiful, broken man with a soggy heart, and for the first time in months, she let herself hope. Just a little. Chapter 6. The Awkward Reunion. Priya opened the door, wearing a face mask, and holding a spoonful of peanut butter. "Oh no," she said, peering past Sienna to where Daniel hovered in the hallway, like a guilty Labrador. "It's you again." "Nice to see you too," Daniel said, ever the British diplomat, though he looked like he'd rather face a panel of angry zoning inspectors. Sienna gave a helpless shrug. "I didn't know where else to go." Priya stepped aside with a sigh. "Come in, but if he bleeds on my rug, he's paying for it." They settled in her flat, a chaotic blend of vintage armchairs, feminist prints, and a strong scent of lavender oil and underlying judgment. "I'm making tea," Priya said. "Sienna, explain while I locate the least passive-aggressive mugs." Sienna told the whole story. The ghosting, Sophia, the collapse, the kiss. She left nothing out, not even the weirdly poetic rain patterns. Daniel sat there and took it. Every glare, every thinly veiled metaphor for his emotional cowardice. Priya paced like an interrogator in a Scandinavian crime drama. When she finally spoke, she pointed a butter knife at Daniel. "If you break her heart again, I will make your life a Wes Anderson film. Quirky, symmetrical, and emotionally devastating." Daniel, to his credit, nodded solemnly. "Understood." Priya raised an eyebrow. "And if I find out you've been lying, again, I'll take you down faster than a dodgy scaffolding permit." Sienna laughed despite herself. It felt strange, the sound, like laughter in a museum, aloud, but barely. After dinner, Daniel offered to wash up. Priya watched him leave the room, then turned to Sienna. "You still love him?" Sienna nodded. "And?" "I don't know what to do with it." Priya sighed. "Then figure it out before your life becomes a sad indie film where the only consistent character is unresolved trauma." Chapter 7. The gallery disaster. The night of the exhibition, the fragments of us opened with just enough pretension to make everyone uncomfortable. Wine flowed like regret, and light critics hovered near canapés like sharks in scarves. The first piece, a distorted self-portrait with jagged mirror shards and flecks of gold leaf, got murmurs of approval. The second, an installation called Echoes of a Vanishing, featured recorded voicemails layered over projections of subway tunnels. A woman in an orange beret wept quietly in front of it, which Sienna counted as a win. Then came the review. He arrived late, wearing a scarf that cost more than her rent, and the smug expression of a man who'd never failed at anything but empathy. "It's the visual equivalent of being dumped via post-it note," he announced, loudly enough for several attendees to turn. Daniel, who had been blending into the crowd like a supportive ex-turned-wallflower, moved before anyone could stop him. "You know," he said, voice calm but sharp, "criticism is most effective when it's not laced with casual cruelty." The critic blinked. "And you are someone who appreciates nuance, and people who don't weaponize metaphors." It escalated. Voices rose. Wine sloshed. The critic eventually stormed out, muttering about deranged romantic interference. Daniel was subsequently banned from the Tate Cafe, though not the exhibit itself. Later, Sienna found him outside, hands in pockets, staring up at the London skyline like it might apologize. "You do know that's not how you win me back, right?" He grinned. "Still worth it." Chapter 8. The flashback, New York, 5 years ago. The Midtown boardroom was cold, sterile, and about as inviting as a dentist's chair during tax season. Daniel stood near the projector screen, clicker in hand, trying to make himself sound more confident than he felt. The PowerPoint behind him glowed, with architectural renderings and safety schematics, all of which were about to be ignored. "This model fails the 9-point lateral load test," Daniel said, pointing to a digital overlay. "It's not code compliant, and worse, it's not safe." A man in a 3-piece suit, Gerald Leavitt, head architect and unofficial office tyrant, barely looked up from his iPad. "It's within tolerance," he muttered. "It's technically within tolerance," Daniel shot back. "But barely. And we're not talking about a parking structure here. This is a residential high-rise, with families." A pause. Uncomfortable. A few associates shuffled their notes, pretending to read. One woman looked genuinely sympathetic before quickly diverting her eyes. Gerald sighed. "We've already broken ground. Materials have been ordered. Any redesign means cost, delays, lawsuits, and dead people. If this thing collapses," Daniel snapped. That got their attention. Not in the good way. Gerald leaned back in his chair, his mouth curling into the kind of smile reserved for interns who overstep. Spoken like a man who's never had to answer to shareholders. There it was, the death knell. Responsibility didn't lie with integrity, it lay with profit. The meeting ended with polite applause for the next presenter, someone pitching a minimalist retail park in Connecticut. Daniel stood there for a moment, clutching his laptop, watching his report disappear under a stack of untouched croissants. 3 weeks later, the building, Whitmore Tower, ironically partially collapsed. The top floors caved like a badly folded soufflé. 3 people died, including a single mother and her teenage son. The investigation was swift, sanitized, and pointedly avoided Daniel's report. His name appeared once in a local paper and was quickly buried by a flood of legal jargon and corporate apologies. Daniel resigned the next day. He booked a one-way ticket to Heathrow, packed only what he could carry, and left behind a rented apartment, a half-finished whiskey bottle, and a voicemail from his boss that simply read, "You did what you could. Let it go." But he didn't. Couldn't. Not then. Not for a long time. Chapter 9. The Fight. They met again in the narrow kitchen of Sienna's flat, lit only by the dim golden haze of a nearby street lamp, filtering through the blinds. Outside, London's evening buzz hummed, a delivery scooter, the occasional siren, rain tapping on rooftops like someone unsure whether they were welcome. Sienna leaned against the counter, arms crossed, jaw set like she was bracing for an earthquake. Daniel stood opposite her, soaked from the rain again, because apparently every important moment in their lives needed a dramatic weather cue. "You ran," she said, voice low, but thick with restrained fury. Daniel nodded slowly. "I did. You didn't fight. You didn't speak up. You just vanished. And you let me think. God, you let me think it was me. That I did something wrong." "I know," he said, "and I'll regret it every single day." Sienna stared at him like she was trying to decide whether to punch him or cry. You knew what that would do to me. I gave you everything, my trust, my heart, and you disappeared like some ghost in a Charles Dickens novel. I was scared, Daniel said, and for once the bravado dropped. No smirks, no witty comebacks, just raw, unpolished truth. Terrified, actually. I didn't just lose my career. I watched 3 people die because no one listened. Because I didn't scream louder. I blamed myself. So you disappeared and left me to fill in the blanks. What was I supposed to do with that? Just move on? Pretend 3 years meant nothing? No, he said quickly. I never expected you to move on. I didn't even know how to ask for forgiveness, let alone deserve it. The air thickened between them. Not tension, history, heavy and unresolved. You talk about fear like I don't know it, Sienna whispered. I was scared too, Daniel. Scared of loving someone who could vanish without a trace. Scared that my gut was wrong. That I misread everything. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, as if she might bolt. You didn't misread it, he said. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy with rage and heartbreak. Then why does it still hurt like I did? Daniel didn't answer. Not with words. His silence filled the space, honest in its inadequacy. Then Sienna stepped back, creating distance like a closing door. I don't know if I can do this again. Daniel's throat worked hard. Then let me keep showing up. Let me earn it. I'll stay. I won't run this time. Her voice cracked. That's a nice promise, Daniel. But so was forever. Chapter 10. The Second Chance. It was 2 weeks before she saw him again. He didn't text, didn't call. He gave her space, something he used to be terrible at, back when they were inseparable and overconfident in their shared future. So when she opened her front door one Saturday morning to find him there, hair windswept, and wearing a cardigan that screamed, "I've been thinking deep thoughts in coffee shops," she raised a skeptical brow. Don't worry, he said. I come bearing actual blueprints. Is this a metaphor? Yes, but also literal blueprints. She stepped aside with a sigh. He spread them on her dining table, a hand-drawn rendering, clearly done late at night. There were coffee rings and smudges, a crooked label that read, "House, not a hideout." It was a modest structure. 3 stories, exposed brick, oversized windows, an art studio on the top floor, and a tiny garden in the back. You're building a house? He shook his head. We could build it, if you want. It doesn't have to be real. Or maybe it can be. I don't know. He exhaled. I want to build something that lasts. Something we don't have to explain or hide from. Sienna studied the sketch. She saw the small notes in the margins. Morning light hits here, good spot for tea, gallery wall, her favorites. Every detail whispered, I know you, I still know you. And you thought this would convince me? She asked. Daniel smiled, nervous and boyish. It's either this or a puppy. She laughed despite herself, then looked at him, really looked. You're not the man who left. I'm trying not to be. A pause, a beat. She reached out and ran her fingers over the paper. Then prove it, she said softly. Chapter 11. Sophia Interlude. Sophia Kensington was the kind of woman who could look simultaneously fragile and terrifying. She wore her illness like vintage Chanel, elegantly, but with an edge that dared you to pity her. Her flat in Notting Hill was minimalist, tasteful, and eerily quiet, like even the furniture had decided to speak only when spoken to. Sienna hadn't planned to visit, but Daniel had sent a one-line text, "She wants to see you." So now she sat on a plush cream sofa, across from the woman who had, by circumstance and choice, rewritten her love story. I hope you don't mind peppermint tea, Sophia said, placing the teapot between them. Caffeine makes my heart dramatic. Sienna offered a polite smile, unsure whether to laugh or wince. No, it's fine, thanks. For a moment, there was only the sound of tea pouring and the clink of a teaspoon. Then Sophia looked up, eyes like cracked porcelain. I'm not the villain, you know. I never said you were, Sienna replied, but you thought it. Sienna didn't argue. She didn't need to. Sophia took a slow sip. Daniel, he wasn't in love with me. Not ever. And I knew that. But when everything fell apart for him, he needed someone. I just happened to be the one left standing. You were sick. I was, she nodded. Still am, technically, but remission has a funny way of making people think you're fixed. Sienna studied her. Why tell me this now? Sophia leaned forward, suddenly fierce. Because I saw what losing you did to him. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak for weeks. He'd sit in the same chair every night, staring at the wall like if he blinked, you'd disappear all over again. Sienna's breath caught. It was one thing to feel abandoned, another to learn he'd been broken too. He never stopped loving you, Sophia said gently. I told him to go back, told him to fix it. But he thought he'd lost the right. Sienna looked down at her teacup. Maybe he did, maybe. But maybe you're both just a little too good at building walls. Sophia reached into a drawer and slid a sealed envelope across the table. Read this when you're ready to forgive him. Oh, Sienna didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she looked up and said, quietly, What if I can't? Sophia's smile was sad and soft. Then I hope you'll remember that loving someone doesn't mean excusing their mistakes. It just means knowing whether the story's worth rewriting. Chapter 12. The London Rain, Again. The South Bank had always been their place. Long walks past the London Eye, late-night arguments turned into whispered reconciliations. The Thames never judged, just listened, flowing steady as ever. They met there again, no text, no planning, just a mutual instinct, as if the city itself conspired to bring them together. It had rained earlier, naturally, London's version of setting the stage. The air was damp and electric, clouds parting just enough to let a few golden street lamps glow like a Turner painting. Sienna stood by the railing, coat wrapped tight, eyes on the water. She didn't turn when Daniel approached. You always show up when it rains, she said. I like to think it makes me cinematic. She finally looked at him. No sarcasm, no smirk, just a quiet resignation. Why now? Because I needed to see you. Not to fix it, not to beg. Just to be near you. They stood in silence, the city's heartbeat thrumming around them. Trains rumbling, music drifting from a busker down the walkway. The occasional laugh from a couple who didn't know their love story had a title yet. Daniel cleared his throat. I love you. 3 words. Simple, raw, uncluttered by defense mechanisms or witty comebacks. Sienna didn't reply. She didn't have the words. Her heart was a battlefield, still smouldering from old fires. But she didn't leave, either. Instead, she reached into her pocket and ran her fingers along the edge of an unopened envelope. Chapter 13. The letter. The envelope waited on her bedside table like it had been there for years. Unassuming, innocent, dangerous. It was 3:44 a.m., the kind of hour where nothing good or rational happens. Sienna sat cross-legged in bed, the city breathing quietly outside her window. She held the letter like it might combust. Then she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, looping and precise. Sophia's voice filled the room in her absence. Sienna, if you're reading this, then he's told you everything. Or most of it. Or, at least, enough to have earned your silence again. That's something. I won't tell you to forgive him. That's your right. But I will tell you this. Daniel's a mess. Beautiful, brilliant, infuriating, but still a mess. And yet, somehow, he's your mess. You calmed the chaos in him. Not by taming it, but by accepting it. That's rare. Don't throw that away, because he made the same mistake we all make. He assumed you'd be better off without him. Pride is a clever thief. It steals joy and dresses it up as dignity. Don't let it ruin a good love story. Take care, Sienna. Sienna exhaled, the kind of breath you only take when something inside you shifts. She didn't cry at first, not until the line about pride. Then it hit her, the weight of it all, the lost time, the silence, the ache that hadn't left, only grown familiar. She clutched the letter to her chest and cried until the city began to blush with mourning. Chapter 14. The Decision. She stood outside his flat in Camden, soaked, breathless and wildly uncertain. Rain again, London's signature move, as if the weather itself had taken an active interest in their relationship. It was barely dawn, no traffic, no city sounds, just the hush of a world not yet awake. In her coat pocket, a folded letter, slightly damp. In her chest, a heart too tired to keep pretending indifference. Sienna hesitated only a moment before knocking. The door creaked open. Daniel blinked at her, disoriented, curls wild, glasses askew. He wore a threadbare grey jumper and held a pencil like he'd just been sketching dreams. "What, Sienna?" His voice was raspy, sleep-worn, or maybe hope-worn. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, the way you do when you're either very brave or very foolish. The flat was dim, lit only by the blue wash of early morning, and covered in paper, blueprints. They were everywhere, on the walls, the floor, even taped to the fridge. But they weren't buildings. They were rooms, corners, spaces that felt lived in. There was a kitchen with open shelves labelled her tea, a reading nook bathed in natural light, a child's bedroom with a mobile shaped like stars and paper cranes. She stared. He watched her stare. "What is all this?" she said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "It's us, or what us could look like, if you still believed in it." Sienna turned, trying to keep her voice level. "You're building me a dream house now?" "I'm building our life," he said quietly. "For the first time, with you in every room." The sheer earnestness of it hit her like a rogue gust of wind. She should have laughed, mocked, deflected, but all she could do was blink back the sudden heat in her eyes. And what if it collapses again? He stepped closer, not touching her, just existing in her space. "Then we rebuild, stronger, smarter, together." Sienna looked around at the hundreds of sketches, each one precise, detailed, full of intent. Like love, if love had blue ink and fine margins. Finally, she met his eyes. "I'm in," she said softly but confidently. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like she was saying someone else's lines in a play. But she meant them, every syllable. Daniel didn't kiss her right away. Instead, he laughed softly, one of those rare, cracked laughs that come from somewhere close to salvation. Then he pulled her into a hug that felt like exhaling after holding your breath for far too long. Sienna buried her face in his shoulder. "This doesn't fix everything, you know." "I know," he stated, stroking her hair. "But it's something," she admitted. "It's everything," he said. Chapter 15. The Rebuild. They bought the townhouse in Islington on a Tuesday, because apparently Tuesdays are for impulse decisions and questionable real estate investments. It was a crumbling Victorian with creaky floorboards, a suspicious mould patch shaped like Richard Nixon, and a front garden that could generously be described as post-apocalyptic. Sienna stared at the leaning banister and raised a skeptical brow. "You sure this one won't collapse on us?" Daniel grinned, hammer in one hand, optimism in the other. "Not a chance." Rebuilding wasn't romantic. It was messy, sweaty, loud. They argued over paint colours and the ethics of wallpaper. Daniel wanted warm neutrals. Sienna favoured jewel tones and a frankly concerning amount of burnt orange. They discovered mould under the kitchen sink, squirrels in the attic, and an entire wall that was held up by what appeared to be hope and outdated plasterboard. But they also discovered something else. Rhythm. Sienna learned how to use a power drill, badly, and how to laugh at herself, slightly less badly. Daniel learned to listen without interrupting, and to let her lead sometimes, even if her methods involved mood boards and passive-aggressive post-it notes. Their hands got dirty, and so did their hearts, cleaned out, patched up, made stronger. There were days Sienna doubted everything, like when the plumbing exploded mid-shower, or when Daniel accidentally painted over her vintage Bowie poster. But he always came back with tea and apologies, and she always forgave him. Mostly. Late one night, as they sat on the bare floor eating takeaway out of plastic cartons, Daniel leaned back against the wall and asked, "What if we screw this up?" Sienna shrugged. "Then we fix it. Or we turn the guest room into a soundproof screen chamber." He laughed boyishly. "I love you, you know." "I know," she said, offering him a dumpling. "But say it again when the boiler breaks." Chapter 16. The Wedding. It wasn't the wedding she'd imagined as a girl. There were no horses, no string quartets, no perfectly curated Pinterest boards. Instead, there was a back garden strung with fairy lights, mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbours, and a wedding playlist that shuffled accidentally into ABBA halfway through the vows. Sienna wore a tea-length dress with pockets. Essential, emotional moments required tissues and lip gloss. Her shoes were scuffed, her eyeliner was uneven, but she looked radiant, giddy, flushed, whole. Daniel wore navy, not black because too funeral-y, and not grey because too accountant. Just enough formality to be sincere. He kept patting his jacket pocket nervously, as if the ring might spontaneously disappear. Priya officiated, naturally. "If anyone here objects," she declared, "speak now, or prepare for passive-aggressive texts and years of awkward brunches." No one objected. Sophia sat in the front row, pale but smiling, her eyes shimmering with something like pride, or maybe relief, as if watching them find each other again healed something in her too. During the vows, Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "I promise to be the one who stays, even when the pipes burst, or your gallery critics don't get it, or you threaten to smother me with a throw pillow for snoring." Sienna grinned. "I promise not to actually smother you, even when you mansplain building codes, or forget our anniversary because you're in a 3-day sketching trance." They kissed under the fairy lights. Someone popped a bottle of Prosecco that hit the neighbour's cat. The cake tilted slightly to one side, as if bowing to the chaos. It was perfect, not because everything went right, but because they felt it right. And this time, neither of them ran. Chapter 17. The baby. 3 years later, their daughter entered the world like she had a train to catch. The birth plan, abandoned. The overnight bag, forgotten. The cab to the hospital, missed entirely, thanks to Daniel insisting on packing snacks, and Sienna screaming that if he didn't put the hummus down and get in the bloody car, she would name the child something unforgivable, like Karen. Labour was chaos dressed in hospital scrubs. Sienna cursed loudly, creatively, and often in 2 languages. Daniel cried once, then blamed it on hospital lighting. The midwife told him to sit down before he fainted. The nurse told Sienna she was doing great, and Sienna told the nurse where to shove that opinion. But when it was over, and she held their daughter for the first time, red-faced, squalling, with tiny fists clenched like she was ready to throw hands at the world, Sienna forgot everything else. Pain, fear, doubt. It all vanished in the warmth of that tiny body pressed to hers. Daniel looked at the baby like she was blueprints and miracle rolled into one. "She has your eyes," he whispered, brushing a fingertip over the baby's cheek. "She has your timing," Sienna muttered. Dramatic and inconvenient. They named her Eliza, after a character in one of Sienna's favourite novels, the kind of woman who always spoke her mind and wore practical shoes. Priya sent a bottle of champagne and a baby onesie that read, "My parents argue about paint swatches." Sophia visited a week later, wheezing slightly but glowing. She held Eliza like she was holding the future. "You'll be a better mother than you think," she told Sienna, "because you know what broken feels like, and what it takes to heal." Sienna cried in the bath that night, not because she was sad, but because she was so full she thought she might actually burst. She looked at her reflection, hair damp, skin pale, circles under her eyes, and thought, "I did it, we did it." And somehow, she felt powerful. Daniel brought her tea and a biscuit on a tray shaped like a cloud. "You're doing brilliant." "I smell like milk and existential dread," she said. He kissed her forehead. "Still brilliant." When Eliza woke up at 3 a.m. and 4:15 and 5:30, they took turns holding her, rocking in silence, humming old Bowie songs like lullabies. In those sleepless hours, Sienna realized something unexpected. She had never felt more alive. Love wasn't grand declarations or cinematic kisses in the rain. It was this: sleep deprivation, shared toast, the small quiet work of showing up again and again and again. It was cleaning spit up off your shoulder while whispering, "I love you," across a dark room. It was laughing over baby farts and crying over milestones. It was knowing you were in this together, even when you were so tired you could barely remember your own name. There was a morning, 4 weeks in, when Daniel returned from the corner cafe with 2 lattes and a cinnamon bun, only to find Sienna asleep on the floor beside Eliza's crib, one hand inside it. He stood there for a minute, watching them breathe in unison, the dust motes drifting like lazy confetti in the morning night. And when Eliza reached out one night, tiny fingers clutching Sienna's hair and Daniel's finger simultaneously, they both looked at each other and smiled. She was the most beautiful thing they'd ever built. Chapter 18. The exhibition, again. The gallery walls were blank and expectant, like they were holding their breath. Sienna stood in the center of the Tate Modern's East Wing, arms crossed, hair pinned back with the effort of a woman who no longer cared what critics said, but still remembered their names. Rebuilt was her most personal work, sculptures, installations, and sketches chronicling love, fractured and found again. The centerpiece, a heart, life-sized, delicately fractured glass, the cracks filled with gold leaf, in a nod to kintsugi, the Japanese art of embracing damage. The inscription on the pedestal read, "The Fragile Heart of London." Around it were companion pieces, a cracked teacup balanced on marble, a pair of baby shoes cast in bronze, one slightly tilted, a series of shadow boxes depicting moments of quiet reconciliation. Every piece told a story, and the room hummed with something electric - grief transformed. When the crowd arrived, curators, collectors, curious strangers, she stood beside Daniel, who held Eliza in his arms. Their daughter wore tiny pink headphones and a tutu, and was attempting to eat a crayon with artistic intent. People lingered at the heart sculpture. Some took photos, others just stared, misty-eyed, like they were seeing their own breakages mirrored back in glass and gold. A man whispered to his wife, "It looks like how I felt after my brother died." A teenager just stood there, tears streaming down his face, in a leather jacket, wiped a tear away when she thought no one was looking. One critic, the same one who had once compared her work to emotional debris on acid, approached her and said, "I didn't get it before. I think I do now." Sienna arched a brow. "Or maybe you just got older and sadder." He grinned. "Possibly. But this is honest." Daniel kissed her cheek and whispered, "You did it." "No," she said contently. "We did it. Not me." The reception ended with speeches. Sienna spoke briefly. No tears, no poetic metaphors. Just one line, "You don't need to be whole to be worthy of love." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Later, as the crowd thinned and the wine glasses emptied, Eliza toddled up to the sculpture and pointed. "Mama's heart!" Sienna smiled and scooped her up. "That's right, darling. It broke, and then it didn't." They left the gallery hand in hand, with the night air cool and clear, the city lights blinking like a heartbeat. Somewhere between the cobblestones and the stars, Sienna felt something click into place, like the past had finally found its purpose. She wasn't rebuilding anymore. She had rebuilt. Chapter 19. The Epiphany. Sophia passed away on a Sunday morning, the type of day when the world feels suspended between sleep and waking, when the light outside the window is soft, just like the air. It wasn't sudden, exactly. It had been coming for months. Sienna had known for weeks that the end was near, that Sophia had slipped into that final, peaceful state where time didn't matter anymore. The conversations had slowed. The visits had become more about presence than words, the kind of silences that meant everything, the kind of silences you could rest in without feeling the need to fill them. Daniel had been with her when she passed, her hand in his. A slow exhale, the kind you make when you finished everything you need to do, when your heart has finally decided it's okay to let go. Sienna had arrived a few moments after, standing by the door, watching as Daniel kissed Sophia's forehead one last time before the nurses came in to prepare her body. It felt like time itself had come to a quiet stop in the room, as if it needed to pause and mourn before continuing. At the funeral, Daniel held Sienna's hand in a way that didn't speak of grief alone, but of gratitude for the woman who had guided them both back to each other, for the courage she had given them to open their hearts again. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic farewells, just people who had loved her, who stood in quiet understanding. Sophia's death was a paradox, a relief for the suffering that had ended, and an ache that settled deeply in every corner of Sienna's heart. They buried her in the small cemetery by the Thames, not far from where they had once stood, trying to rebuild the pieces of their past.
The air was thick with memories, both painful and sweet, of a time when they had all been younger, when hope felt simpler and love seemed a little less fragile.
The walk back from the cemetery was quiet. Sienna's hand in Daniel's, their steps measured, as if the world still hadn't quite righted itself after that last breath had been taken. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly, his thumb tracing over the back of her hand. It was the kind of question that could never quite capture the depth of the answer, but she appreciated the effort. Sienna paused, searching for the words that felt right. "I'm sad, but not in the way I thought I'd be. More like I finally understand everything she did for us. And now I know why." Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand a little tighter, the way he did when words felt insufficient. "She loved us, even when we didn't deserve it." Sienna smiled through her tears. "Yeah, she did." They walked in silence for a while longer, the damp air around them steady with the promise of healing. The weight of Sophia's absence was undeniable, but so was the sense that, in some strange way, she had given them a gift, a push forward, a chance to find themselves in each other, even in the midst of loss. When they returned home that evening, Eliza was waiting for them, her small face scrunched in confusion. "Where's Auntie Sophia?" she asked, looking up at her parents with wide, innocent eyes. Sienna knelt down, brushing a stray curl from Eliza's forehead. "Auntie Sophia is in a better place now, darling. She's not hurting anymore." Eliza nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Then, with the most adorable look of determination, she added, "I'll draw her a picture, with lots of colours." "That sounds perfect," Sienna said, kissing her daughter's cheek. Later that night, as they sat together in the quiet of the living room, Daniel held Sienna close, his head resting on hers. It felt like the first moment of real peace they had shared in weeks, like the world was allowing them to catch their breath after the storm. "I'll be here," Daniel whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "Always." "I know," she replied softly. "And I'll be here too, with you." They held each other in the quiet, the weight of the day settling into the fabric of their lives. Life went on, as it always did, but it was softer now, more knowing, more grateful. Chapter 20. The Fragile Heart Mended. Years had passed since that quiet morning by the Thames. Years that had transformed their lives into something deeper, something truer. Sienna and Daniel had learned to love in a way that was less about perfection and more about the art of being present. Eliza, now 8, had developed a fierce sense of independence and a mouthy streak that could rival Sienna's own. She was all elbows and sharp opinions, with Daniel's wild curls and Sienna's bright eyes, and she never stopped asking questions, endless, unstoppable questions about life, love, and why the cat always refused to sit where she wanted it to. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eliza climbed into their bed, her small body wedged between them like the perfect storm. She gazed up at them with wide, questioning eyes. "Mum," Eliza said, her voice a mix of curiosity and innocence, "how did you know Daddy was the one?" Sienna exchanged a glance with Daniel, who was pretending to sleep, even though they both knew this was a question only a child could ask with such wide-eyed honesty. Sienna smiled softly, running her fingers through Eliza's curls. "Because he came back," she said, "after everything. After all the mistakes, after all the reasons not to, he came back." Eliza nodded seriously, as if absorbing the weight of the answer, and then, without missing a beat, she asked, "But why didn't you leave, like you said you might?" Sienna laughed softly, the sound full of love and weariness. "Because I didn't want to, and because I knew I'd never find anyone else who could be as stubborn as your father." Daniel snorted at this, but Sienna silenced him with a finger to his lips. "Your dad is the one for me, Eliza, because he never gave up on us. Also, because he loved me, even when I didn't love myself." Eliza nodded thoughtfully, then grinned and settled down into the space between them. "I think I like that answer." Daniel kissed the top of her head, then turned to Sienna with a mischievous grin. "I'm never going to live down being your one and only, am I?" "Not a chance," Sienna replied with a wink. "You're stuck with me." And just like that, in that simple exchange, the fragile heart that had been battered and broken over the years felt whole again. It wasn't a perfect heart, it wasn't even a clean heart, but it was a real one, mended with laughter, mistakes, and an abundance of love. In the warmth of their home, surrounded by the love they had rebuilt together, Sienna knew that this was it. This was home. This was forever. And this time, they would never leave. The end. Bonus points still apply if you imagine Daniel muttering Shakespearean insults while assembling IKEA furniture, especially during the part where he realizes he used the wrong screws 3 pages ago. Thank you for joining me on a trip to my hometown of London, England. I very much hope you enjoyed the fragile heart of London. Please like and subscribe to my channel for my stories of love and redemption. Leave a comment on what city you would like to see featured in one of my stories next. Until next time, I'm Abby Turner. Take care.